But in business, you don't need to be the smartest person. You just need to be smart enough. I mean, know this, the smartest people in business or the smartest people in the world are not the richest people. The smartest people work for the richest people. And here's why. Generally speaking, highly intelligent people are risk averse. If they perceive a low probability for success, they don't take the risk. Why should they? Hello again. Welcome to the Ruthless Truth. I'm your host, Truth Davis. Ruthless Truth launched on May 15th, and I want to first just say thank you. Thank you so very much for all the initial support with the launch. Due to your support, the 1 week, the Ruthless Truth ranked in the top 25% of all podcasts in the country. Now, it's a little bit of a marginal, modest achievement. To get from the top 50% to the top 25%, you just need to triple the volume of listeners. But to get from the top 25% to the top 10%, you have to increase it by 10 times. So it gets to be a steep curve over time, but hey, we're just getting started. And again, thank you so much. Also, coming up soon is the launch of the website. Depending on when you're listening, it may already have launched. It's truthdavis.com. You can go there, leave comments, suggestions for new topics, learn more about the podcast. And in addition to the existing social media platforms of Truth Davis 5 for Instagram, and the Facebook page is Ruthless Truth. Okay? So this is a forum where I kind of offer my opinions and views of the world based on what I think is a unique life experience. And you can read my bio in the notes. Talk about a number of things, but not sports or politics, because you can get that just about anywhere. So general format is talk a little bit about what's currently going on or trending in the world, get deeper into today's truth, and then end with some fun American history facts. Because today's truth may take up some time, I'm just going to briefly comment on one thing in the news that I can't get away from, which is the Sean P. Diddy Combs trial. As hard as I try to avoid it and get away from it, it just seems to be impossible. But from what I've heard, I just really have one or two thoughts. What I've learned is that he's not a great guy. You know, he's a sexual deviant, he's prone to violence, and he's been tough on his women. But where does the racketeering evidence come in? I thought this was the RICO trial. So maybe that'll come in later. I feel like all of the testimony at this point felt like a little bit not my business. But hey, we'll see. And that's pretty much the only comment on that, because I want to get to today's truth. Okay, so today's truth, I want to talk about risk taking. I know it's cliche that when you say life is made of choices, but it really is. And I guess choices is a little bit incomplete. It's not just choices, but it's the outcome from those choices. And so if those outcomes are positive, we experience feelings like joy, satisfaction, optimism, sometimes just relief. But if the outcome is not positive, while we might experience a number of feelings, the most common feeling we're going to feel is regret, which I personally think is one of the worst feelings in the world. And I feel fortunate that I haven't had to experience it much, because regret sucks. So what is your thought process when you're trying to decide whether or not to take a risk? Most people aren't conscious of it. You probably don't think much about it, but we all pretty much go through the same thought process. We look at the risk, we look at the potential reward, and then we look at the probability or likelihood that it's going to have a positive outcome. Now, don't go looking for that formula in Google or a textbook. That's just, my way of thinking about it. But I think it's pretty straightforward. It's human nature to avoid risk. So most people just focus on the negative side of that equation. Like, how risky is it? What's the worst thing that could happen? How likely is it that I'm going to reap the reward? What happens if I fail? We turn around and we look at the reward, and then we ask the question and answer it. Is it worth it? Let me give you a real easy everyday example. Lottery tickets. Okay. People in this country will spend $125 billion on lottery tickets. And the reason is when they do the risk reward equation, the risk is relatively low. The risk is just the price of the lottery ticket. And so when you compare the price of the lottery ticket at the potential for life-changing, obscene amounts of rewards, that seems like an easy risk and it's worth it. And most people choose to do it. Okay. Personally, I have never purchased a lottery ticket in my life, ever. And people are often surprised to hear that from me. But for me, I look at the likelihood side of that equation. You know, I study statistical theory, and I know that the likelihood of winning the Powerball or the mega jackpot is astronomically low. So low that there's no difference in your chances if you buy one ticket or you buy 1,000 tickets. Okay. So to me, it's just not worth it because it's almost a certainty that I'm not going to win. And when it comes to risk, you know, we learn these lessons early in life. Children are well aware of the behaviors that will get them in trouble. And they get in trouble because they do a calculation of, am I likely to get caught versus what I'm likely to enjoy? And sometimes they make the calculation it's worth it and they get away with it. And other times they get caught and they get punishment. But they learn that trade-off early. In our mixed up teen years, okay, one of the simplest occasions where young men have to deal with risk, the high school dance or party. You know, it takes a lot to walk across the room where a group of girls are sitting and ask one of them to dance. Well, you better get it right, because if she says no, you don't have the option of asking one of her friends because she's like, what am I, second choice? So then he has to make the walk of shame back to his friends. So we all understand risk and we learned it early. But today I want to look at risk in the workplace. First, how are you feeling about where you are in your career? Have you overachieved versus the expectations you had at an earlier age? Well, if you have, congratulations. That's great. That puts you in a fairly fortunate, favorable group. But if not, and you're somewhat disappointed or expected to have done more by now, don't be too hard on yourself. Most people experience disappointment in their career. Sometimes it's a temporary setback, or sometimes it's just the reality and long-term situation that things just didn't go the way that you had hoped they would go. Everyone's situation is different. And there could be, and I'm sure there could be a number of reasons why things didn't work out the way you expected or hoped. But I'm quite confident that one of those reasons had to be related to risk-taking. So today's truth, I want to talk about risk-taking in two areas. Your current job and then your longer-term career goals. As you may know, I spent 30 years in corporate America, and by most accounts, it was fairly successful. I'm often asked, what were the keys to your success? I mean, well, there were several. First, there was just getting the opportunity to try, having great bosses and mentors, diligence in my career planning, and sometimes just a little luck. But I know a huge factor of it was my willingness to take risk, and at sometimes fairly big risk. Let's focus on an example, like a current job example. And my best personal example is the launch of the first branding campaign for Verizon Wireless, which, is commonly known as Can You Hear Me Now? Okay, first I have to set the stage for what was going on back then. So come with me in the Wayback Machine to 2001. At that time, Verizon was less than 2 years old. And while we were the largest wireless provider, Sprint was kicking our ass in the marketplace. Remember, this was before text messaging and camera phones and video phones. So at that time, wireless was really about voice calling. And Sprint was in the middle of a very impressive run where for 14 consecutive quarters, they led the category in new subscriber growth, meaning more people were signing up for Sprint every month than any other wireless provider. So in September 2001, I was appointed Vice President of Advertising and Brand Management for Verizon Wireless. And my number one assignment was to launch the first ever brand campaign by the first quarter of 2002, actually. Now, this wasn't because the Verizon executive team felt that strongly about, the impact and importance of branding. They didn't. They believed the only type of advertising that really mattered was promotional advertising, where you talk about the deals and the sales and all the different incentives to come into the store and sign up for Verizon wireless service. It was a sales-driven culture, and that's what salespeople want. Salespeople can't get enough of you promoting price discounts and things for them to come into the store. But there was no denying the current business results. Sprint was beating us, and they were beating us with brand advertising. They were positioning themselves as, quote, the clear alternative to cellular. And so in my leadership's brilliant wisdom, or clear grasp of the obvious, whichever way you want to look at it, they said to me, give us a brand campaign. And just to be clear, the objective of a brand campaign is to drive awareness, product differentiation, and ultimately preference that leads to a purchase. Okay? That's what we're trying to achieve. Again, at this time, wireless was all about voice calling. We knew we had the best network at Verizon, but it wasn't making a difference in the business. It wasn't driving preference. And it was mainly because people didn't know we had the best network, and they also just assumed all wireless carriers had the same crappy service. So if you think they're all the same, that's not going to make you choose one over another. So my direction to the agencies agency, if we make network reliability, network quality, the key issue in the category, we're going to win because we know we have the best service. Okay. So now you know what the assignment was, and here's where it gets a little tricky. So the ad agency came back with 3 potential ad campaigns to address this subject. And Can You Hear Me Now was one of them, and then there were 2 others. After I saw the presentations, it was really clear to me. And by the way, the Can You Hear Me Now campaign internally, we called it Test Man. So that's how we referred to it. It was very clear to me that Test Man was the best option. Okay. Unfortunately for me, the executive team didn't agree with that. None of them liked the Test Man campaign. My CEO didn't like it. My COO didn't like it. None of the sales division leads and operational leads liked it. Okay. But the thing I loved so much about the Verizon culture was it was a ownership culture. If you had the assignment, you owned it. It's your decision, and you live or die by the outcomes of the decision that you made. Okay. So I like that. But this did present me with a moment of truth. Now, before continuing on how that moment of truth was, let me just provide a little perspective on advertising. If you pay any attention to advertising today, you know there's a lot of bad advertising out there. And if it isn't bad, it's at least mediocre. And you know why? Because to make great advertising, you have to take risk. You have to go for it. You have to break away from the norm. So why don't more marketers go for it? Why don't they do it? Because more so than any other function in a business, marketing failures are public. Okay? If the IT guy miswrites a code, nobody knows it and it gets corrected. If accounting made a bad calculation, it's usually caught somewhere in the process and before anybody even knows it happens. Okay? But if the marketer puts out bad advertising, everyone sees it and everyone knows it. So because of that potential outcome, most marketers play it safe. And while mediocre advertising may not build a business, it may not have impact, it's also unlikely to get that marketer fired, okay, because they had bombed in the marketplace. Even so, despite that playing it safe, the average tenure for a chief marketing officer is about little less than 2 years. Okay. All right. So back to my moment of truth. Do I play it safe and pick one of the campaigns that the leadership liked and support it? Because if I did and it bombed, you couldn't put it all on me. Hey, we all made that choice. We all walked down that path together. But if I went with my belief, then I was going to be on my own. Well, obviously I did go with the Test Man, but the story really doesn't end there. After we shot the first few commercials, I brought home a rough cut. And a rough cut is basically our early take of the ad, before they put in graphics and other stuff, but you can still get a very good sense of it. So I wanted to get some feedback from my wife. I put it in the VCR, let you know how long ago that was, played it a couple of times, and I'll never forget the first words out of her mouth. "Your career isn't riding on this, is it?" I was like, wow. Okay. Well, actually, yes. Not my whole career, but my career at Verizon is riding on this. If this doesn't work, we'll have to find something else to do. Still, one more hurdle. The launch was scheduled for the first week of February, again in 2002. And 1 week before the launch, my boss, who was the chief marketing officer for the company, comes into my office and says to me, "I think we should delay the launch." And not because he didn't believe in it, but here was his point. He's like, "Look, we're going to have a lousy sales quarter. January was terrible. We're going to have a bad quarter. And if you launch this campaign, you will be a convenient scapegoat for the sales organization. They'll just say, we didn't make our numbers because Marvin ran brand advertising instead of running the promotional ads that we asked for that we know drive people into the store." And my response to him was, a brand advertising campaign is like having a baby. If you wait for the perfect time to do it, it'll never happen. I'm like, "We're going to go." And he's like, "Okay." And that's all he said. But what wasn't said was, and understood was, it's your funeral. The good thing is I didn't have to sweat it out. It launched on a Monday, and by the next weekend, store traffic was up 20%. We had a killer quarter. We beat Sprint's, at that point, 15-quarter winning streak, and Verizon began to dominate the wireless category from that point forward. So, how do you decide whether to take a risk or play it safe? Well, first, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. How ambitious are you really? Is it more important to you to do great, or is it to make sure you don't fail or get in trouble? It's like with my investment clients. The first question I ask them, is it more important to you to maximize gains and grow wealth, or is it to protect principal and minimize losses? These are questions that only you can answer for yourself. And one other thing when you're thinking about this, another key point I'd like to make. When it comes to risk-taking in business, intelligence is greatly overrated. Now, I'm talking specifically about business. Now, in some fields like biomedical research and engineering, you absolutely want the smartest people working on it. You want the smartest people doing drug research and coming up with cures, and I want the sharpest engineers designing commercial passenger aircraft. But in business, you don't need to be the smartest person. You just need to be smart enough. Know this, the smartest people in business or the smartest people in the world are not the richest people. The smartest people work for the richest people. And here's why. Generally speaking, highly intelligent people are risk averse. If they perceive a low probability for success, they don't take the risk. Why should they when they know it's likely to fail? But the people who have high self-confidence, they'll look at that low probability and think, hey, I know for other people they may fail, but I believe I can do it. And they go for it. One of my all-time favorite quotes is from an entrepreneur who said, if I had gone to college, I would have had enough sense to know that I couldn't start this business. So again, intelligence, a little overrated. But if you do decide to take risk, I have a few guidelines for you. First, you had to be confident that you're right. And how will you know? Well, perhaps you can test your way in it. When I was doing Test Man, I conducted focus groups with real consumers and showed it to them. And I saw the type of reactions that indicated to me that it was going to go well. If that option is not available to you, maybe you seek feedback from people whose opinion you trust and respect, because support from people like that may embolden you. Second, you need to have a really clear understanding of the repercussions if you're wrong. Okay? This is directly related to your confidence in being right. If you really believe you're right, if you really believe it will work, the risk is less than others would think. But you need to be conscious and know the answer to, what's the worst thing that could happen? And to that point, focus more on the upside than dwelling on what if it doesn't work. Those negative thoughts can quickly spiral downward and overwhelm you. But I'll say this. The actual worst thing that could happen to you is rarely as bad as you think. If you're new to risk taking, start with something small. Don't pick something where the downside means you're going to be unemployed. And related to that, it's better to take the biggest risk early in your career. First of all, you have less to lose because you haven't had enough time to advance as far or attain as much, wealth and assets to lose. Second, if you stumble, you still have plenty of time to recover versus later in your career. Finally, there are two really great things that happen if your risk taking is successful. First, you gain confidence in yourself. But more importantly, the organization grows confident in you. And so when the next situation arises, when you want to take a risk, you've earned somewhat of the benefit of the doubt. And it'll actually be less risky because you will have built more support and trust from others in the organization. Now, that's your current job. Let's look at a greater risk. If you're thinking about changing jobs. In my bio, you'll see I've lived in 8 different states, including Atlanta 5 times. And people ask me why. And it's a really simple answer. I went to where the opportunity was. But a few things to keep in mind when you're thinking about changing jobs. First, you need to understand, why are you doing it? Are you running away from something, or are you running to something? Okay. I had a simple scorecard I used when I assessed each year in my current job. At the beginning of the year, I would ask myself these questions. Am I happy with my role and responsibilities? Am I learning and growing and improving my skills in my craft? Do I feel my contributions are recognized and appreciated? Are me and my family happy living in the community that we're in? And finally, am I paid fairly relative to my peers? If I asked those questions and got 2 or more no's, that told me it was time to make a change. This is what led me to leave Verizon. As I previously stated, the Can You Hear Me Now campaign was a huge success. And when I received my performance review after that launch, I received the highest rating possible and was ranked number 1 in my peer group. Now, I would never say advertising is easy, but there are other marketing projects and other disciplines within marketing that are far more challenging. In the next year after the Can You Hear Me Now campaign, I launched a total store redesign layout for our 1,600 stores. Additionally, I implemented a company-wide brand packaging campaign. Before that, when you went to Verizon and got a phone, it'll say Motorola or Nokia. And I had all the manufacturers adhere to one consistent packaging design. So you got a Verizon package when you got home. I thought I had a better year because those 2 projects were harder than the advertising campaign. But when I came in for my performance review the next year, and while it was great and I got high marks and I got a really big bonus, it was not as good as the previous year. And you know what that told me? I've peaked in this organization. There's nowhere for me to go but down. Time to go. So from there, I joined Comcast as their first ever chief marketing officer. And although the actual title was SVP of sales marketing. And I'll tell you, the first year that I was there, I produced the best advertising of my entire career. I launched the first ever brand campaign for Comcast, and that campaign won Best TV Campaign of the Year in the United States. And when my president learned that, he calls me up. He's like, "We have the best TV campaign." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Against who?" I'm like, "Everybody." He said, "Everybody." So Nike, Coke, McDonald's, Verizon. I'm like, "Everybody." He was like, "That's effing unbelievable." But here's the thing. The ads I ran at Comcast were far riskier and more daring than anything I ran at Verizon. But when I came to Comcast, I had already the street cred from the success at Verizon. So my conservative executive team was more comfortable in trusting me. And so that's the point. The more you achieve success, the more your risks pay off, the easier it gets. Last point. If you're married, you can't make these decisions in isolation. If you choose to take risk, then it's a risk for your entire family. It doesn't work if your spouse is not supportive. Who knows how many great careers never materialize because of a risk-averse spouse who felt, we're doing okay. Why do you want to take a chance and risk this? Why do you want to disrupt what is going on? I realized I was fortunate. My spouse was a greater risk taker than me. Her view always was, you got this job, you can get another one. Okay, let's get to the history fun fact of the day. And I promise you, these will not always be Atlanta based, but this one happens to be. So I want to talk about Spelman College, which is a private Black women's liberal arts college in Atlanta, Georgia. It's ranked number 1 out of 79 historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and that's according to U.S. News and World Report. Now, many people are aware of Spelman, but I think very few know its history, which I find to be interesting, if not fascinating. So, the Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary was founded by Harriet Giles and Sophia Packard, 2 white teachers from Massachusetts. The women met in college and became lifelong friends. Now, neither woman ever married, and they described their relationship as lifetime companion. And that's about as polite and acceptable a term that could be used in those times. So, in 1881, Giles and Packard, aged 53 and 57 respectively, traveled to Atlanta specifically to begin a school for Black freed women. And they found support from Frank Quarles. He was the pastor of Friendship Baptist Church, which had been established in 1866 as the first Black Baptist church in Atlanta. So, the initial school opened in the basement of the church with just 11 students. Well, because of generous donations from the Atlanta Black community, they were able to put a down payment on a 9-acre plot of land near the church. And in 1882, just 1 year after opening, the women returned to Massachusetts to try to raise more money for the school. They were able to gain an introduction to John D. Rockefeller, who at that time was unquestionably the richest man in the U.S., probably the world, but he was also a Northern Baptist. Now, it wasn't until 1884, which was 2 years after they met him, that he actually was able to make the trip down and visit the school. And by that time, the school had grown to 600 students. Rockefeller was so impressed that he paid off all the remaining debts of the property. But you know who was even more impressed than John Rockefeller? His wife, Laura Spelman Rockefeller, and her sister, Lucy Spelman. The Spelmans were longtime activists in the abolitionist movement. So in 1884, the name of the school was changed to Spelman Seminary in honor of Laura Spelman Rockefeller. She also donated the money for the oldest building on campus, which is Rockefeller Hall, which was built in 1886 and still stands to this day. Packard was appointed the Spelman's first president in 1888, and when she died in 1891, her partner Giles continued as president until she died in 1909. In 1924, Spelman's Baptist Seminary became Spelman College. Interestingly, it wasn't until 1987 that Spelman had its first Black female president, Johnetta Cole. So for a school that was founded to educate Black women, it was more than 100 years after it started before a Black woman was in position to lead the school. Absolutely incredible. So you have this premier Black school that was founded by the richest people in the world. And it has continued to thrive. into a premier school, and a very selective one with only a 25% acceptance rate. So one last fun fact about this story. I mentioned at the beginning that the school started at Friendship Baptist Church, the oldest Black Baptist church in Atlanta. Well, in 2012, the city of Atlanta announced plans to build a new football stadium for the Falcons to replace the current stadium, which was the Georgia Dome. But early in the planning, the city recognized a problem. The initial layout for the stadium and the site where they wanted to build it would overtake the site of Friendship Baptist Church. And so they had a dilemma. They really needed the land and property where Friendship Baptist Church was. And so they went to the church leaders to talk to them about it. And the church leaders were adamant. Look, this is a historic national site. This church has been here for 140 years. You know, our congregation knows that it is a beacon and an icon in the Atlanta community. The city of Atlanta said, we'll give you $19.5 million. You know, the church is really just a building. The building is really not the church. It's the people and the congregation that makes the church what it is. So they gladly took the $19.5 million from the city of Atlanta and they relocated their church to another site. Money still talks. So that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Again, visit the website, social media, like, subscribe, offer comments. You know, we're just starting to build this program, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.